Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Team and Culture track, or welcome for the first time. This is the first session you're attending in it. We are super excited to have you. We have two really fun speakers here with us, Mauricio Mancini and Paul Ryan. There he is. To get started, we have a couple of fun facts about our speakers. Mauricio has been a fan of Atlassian tools since 2004. The first version he worked on was 3.0. And this is his third summit presentation, so he's kind of a veteran. And then Paul, he was actually an early denier of the Agile wave. He felt like a lot of the Agile efforts that he saw were just going through the motions, but then he founded a startup in 2005 where they started XP and a very fast CI/CD pipeline. And they started doing a morning meeting to plan the day and look what happened the day before. And he realized they were actually parroting Scrum and actually were Agile. So now he's a believer. All right, well, please welcome Mauricio and Paul to the stage.
All right. Thank you, Shannon. All right, welcome everyone. I know it's late afternoon, but we're going to try to make this a fun presentation for you guys. So I'm going to start by asking everyone in the room a question. And I'd like you to answer the question with a show of hands. So how many people in the room feel that their current Agile deployment is either not firing on all cylinders and is just not giving you what you want? Ah, pretty good. It's about 3/4 of the room. That's better than I expected. So that's pretty good.
Sorry, me too.
You too? Okay.
Sorry.
So that's pretty much what I see at a lot of customers. Between 1 and 2 to 1 and 3, don't think their current Agile deployment is going well. And so I've seen a number of patterns over the years I've been doing this. So I'm going to start by sharing the first 3 common signs that you need a reboot. All right, we'll start there. And we saw these patterns at OpenX, which is Paul's company that he works at. So the first sign is you have 3 to 4 times more projects than you have teams to deliver. In the case of OpenX, they had 43 priority 1 projects. 43, not to count the priority 2 and 3s. And they only had 22 teams to deliver work. So if you have a lot of priority 1 projects, that's your first sign. Your second sign, you have teams that are early in the Agile journey, and yet you have all flavors of Agile. They still haven't figured out how to do the basics, but they're doing their own Agile thing or Agile-like thing. Okay, so that's your second sign. Your third sign is you have what's called featureitis, or as Paul likes to call it, small ball. You have teams that are delivering features every 2 weeks, but they're delivering little features, but they're not connected to anything. They're not trying to deliver a bigger product vision. They're just delivering because the release train is going every 2 weeks. So those are the 3 most common signs, and we started with 3 when we started this presentation, but we did find 2 bonus ones. So here are your 2 bonus signs. Bonus sign number 1, you've already rolled out Agile at least 3 times, and you can see it in the office. The planning poker decks are on everybody's desk. They're collecting dust. The Agile training manuals are all on everybody's desk collecting dust. And everybody's pretty much become a disbeliever of Agile to the point where they tell you Agile just doesn't work. So this is pretty much what we saw when Paul called me in to do some consulting for him at OpenX. And what we ended up seeing is you end up finding a lot of people that are just doing busy work at work. So a lot of people were busy. They were very, very busy. So everybody was assigned to 5 or 6 different things and they felt they were being productive, but yet they weren't really being productive because no one was delivering to a bigger vision. Right? So this is sort of what you're seeing. If you're seeing this in your organization where people are running around and they're really just what you have is people playing Agile rather than being Agile. And you say, what's the difference between the 2? Well, on the left, basically you have people doing the ceremonies. They're doing their morning stand-ups. They have their beautiful Jira boards with to-do, in progress, and done, but they're not being Agile. And being Agile is where you have Agile leadership at all levels knowing what Agile is. You have people that are committed and interested in the work that they're doing. You have that employee engagement to deliver that customer product that you want to deliver to your end customers. So this is what we saw at OpenX, and I'm going to hand it to Paul to give us the 5 steps.
Thank you.
Button doesn't want to click.
Oh, you broke it, okay? Thanks, I like that. Great, so OpenX is an ad exchange, okay? So what does that mean? It means we match brands who have advertising dollars to websites, mobile apps that want to make money on advertising. So we're the largest independent ad exchange, and we're at web scale. What does that mean? Over 100 billion ad requests a day. We syndicate that out and run an auction for those ad requests. So there's around 2.7 trillion events per day that happen on our platform. It's around 15 million lines of code, broken out into around 35 primary services. Half of the code base is, God give me strength, Erlang. Everyone, raise a hand, who knows Erlang? Nobody. It's an there's a big application out there that everyone uses, a message passing application, because that's what it was built for. It was built for Ericsson for their phone switches. So it's an incredibly efficient message passing platform. And you can imagine when you're getting lots of requests and syndicating it, that makes a lot of sense. The other half is primarily Java. So that's what OpenX does. It's around a 220-person tech team, around 105 developers, okay? So the first thing you want to worry about when you're doing any form of transformation is you have to have buy-in from the top. So I'm the new CTO. Obviously, I'm into transformation. But what you have to make sure is that the CEO, the COO, the entire executive team actually understands what Agile is. So things that I heard about what Agile is like, oh, okay, so now we have incredibly predictable release dates. I'm like, well, not really. I mean, that's more like waterfall, right? You spec it out and you kind of build your release plan and you spend a couple of months doing it. I mean, these things are somewhat emergent, right? As you learn about stuff in the marketplace, you tune in the product you're building. So there were tons of those kinds of misconceptions about Agile. And that's my favorite one because so in other words, we're going to be able to predict with huge accuracy what's going on the team. I said, well, no, hold on a sec. You've got to have an Agile organization. So if you do a strategic planning process at the beginning of the year that plans out 12 months of work, does that feel Agile? Not really, right? And so I'm like, this is a mindset change, okay? We're not doing this heavy 5-year Stalinistic planning that a lot of organizations do. And at the bottom, they're like, we'll just throw Agile in and it'll work, okay? That was the mindset. So the first thing to do is make sure the executives understand what's going on with the, this is interesting. Second thing is you actually have to have business goals. I mean, that sounds weird, doesn't it? Every business has goals. What I'm talking about is we're launching new products into the marketplace that's going to generate new revenue, and then we track new revenue every year. And that's the effectiveness of this Agile process, PDLC, which was completely new, which is like, oh, really? So that's kind of how you would want to measure that according to a business goal. There's other business goals. You want to release stuff with high impact. You want to break stuff up into chunks. We don't want to have a 6-month project and then have some value, okay? So getting the mindset so that we do incremental sorts of things, even though we had a 2-week release train, everyone thought of things as kind of like a big bang. You also want to make sure that you're not doing your product planning by hope. Hope is not a mechanism that I think works pretty well. So when you say in Q4, I want to launch this product and take this market or get into this market, you can't do that. You've got to get into the market and the sorts of products you want at the beginning of the year and evolve. Okay, so it's a total mindset change. Finally, if you have 105 engineers that are all busy launching features every 2 weeks and we don't have any really large things occurring, mind you, we're a profitable business, we're doing great. We're scaling. You know, there's a lot of things that are working out well, but getting into new markets and new products is kind of what we have to do. So reduce the frustration. Third thing, clear ownership. What? It's not me, right? So you have to know your role within the organization, and there's a tremendous amount of confusion on who does what. So I would hear things like, well, why wouldn't the engineers tell us it wouldn't work in the marketplace? I'm like, hold on a sec, who's the product owner? Where's product marketing? Marketing in general? You're all the way, you're like building a product and it launches and nobody wants to use it and you're blaming engineers. I mean, that's kind of silly. And then my favorite, I thought the CTO set all the priorities for everything. I wish, right? It doesn't work out that way. It's an organizational sort of thing, the entire organization. Process confusion. Hey, I was in a meeting and I said, you know, this would be great if we had it, and all of a sudden it releases like 2 months later. How did that happen? I didn't tell them to do it. Well, if you don't have any form of process to figure out what you want to do or what things you want to kick off, you know, that sorts of stuff happens. And then finally, if I went back too fast. Oh, God. Oh, I love this when I do this. The final thing is accountability resistance. People don't like metrics, right? Because they think, oh, I'm measuring something, and it can be punitive in some way. Metrics are how you get better at something, okay? And so there was this, I don't want to do planning, I don't want to do metrics, there's a lot of stuff I don't want to do because I don't want to be held accountable. And I kind of understand that if your goals in the organization aren't clear, but it's not the way to iteratively improve. Number 4, we did a bottoms-up and a top-down assessment. Top-down from a strategic point of view, what does OpenX have to do in the marketplace? Bottoms-up, what processes did we have? What tools were we using? And Mauricio is going to talk a lot more about that. Number 5, don't spend too much time figuring out kind of the perfect plan. Just get moving. Move in any direction. Figure out, you know, how start someplace and just start moving. Okay? So those are kind of the five things to consider when you're doing a transformation. Mauricio is going to go more into details about the findings and what we actually did.
All right, thanks, Paul. Switch me? All right. So we had 100 days. So we started on this 100-day journey that Paul put us on, and I wanted to show you the roadmap that we did in 100 days. So we had 100 business days. Clicker is working great. And this is what our roadmap looked like. So we started in September 2017, and we were doing all of the setup until December 2017. I'll just focus on some major things we did. We started with the strategic assessment that a fellow consultant did, Israel Gap, and he did the strategic assessment in 2017. We came in to do the team assessment that Paul asked for. So Paul wanted the top-down view and a bottom-up view. So we started the team assessments in October. That carried over into November. In November, we started a bunch of Agile refresher sessions that I'll get into in a second. Those refreshers continued into December, and in December, we also did a tool realignment because the tools were not optimized. And then the plan was go live with the new process in January 2018. All right? So here's what we did. I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive on some of the assessments that we did. On the strategic assessment side, when the fellow consultant started his assessment, he looked at 4 things. First thing he looked at was meet with the CTO, with Paul. So he wanted to get Paul's vision. Where did Paul want to take this transformation? The second thing he did was meet with CEO, COO, meet with upper management, understand what the strategic vision for the company was, right? During this time, they also did a tech debt analysis to check the quality of the code, and the fellow consultant looked at what was the 1 and 3 year vision for the company. Where did they want to be in 1 to 3 years? So that was his 4 major things he focused on. And from that, the results were, so the strategic assessment results. So he had a number of key findings that he did. His key findings were,
Yeah, you may want to stand behind
I think
it.
I hate standing here now. All right. His key findings were everything was a top priority. So those were those 43 P1 projects. That's what he found in one of his key assessments. Second, the teams were playing Agile instead of being Agile. Third, the tech debt actually revealed that the tech debt at OpenX wasn't that bad. So there was tech debt, but it wasn't out of control. So it was actually pretty good. And finally, portfolio and program planning was inadequate at the time. Okay, so those were his 4 major findings that he had. So he made a number of recommendations. So the first thing he recommended was putting in place an ARB or a product council. An ARB is an architecture review board to basically control the intake of requests coming into the engineering team and make people make decisions on what was coming into the team. The second thing was putting in place a WSJF, or a weighted job shortest job first, and basically leaving it up to OpenX to determine their algorithm for accepting jobs into the team. The third recommendation was to actually have a Kanban board in Jira for upper management. And the upper management is looking at this Kanban board and deciding what the priorities are. So that was one of the recommendations. His fourth recommendation was letting the teams use Scrum or Kanban. For some reason, there was a misconception in the teams that they all had to use Scrum. So his recommendation was pick which one makes sense for you. His final recommendation was using the concept of a dynamic team. So let me explain to you what dynamic team is. You have an initiative, you find your resources in the organization to build a multifunctional team, you put them together, they work on the initiative. When the initiative's done, you tear down the team. So that was his recommendation given the reality of OpenX. Okay? So those were his recommendations from a strategic point of view. Lost connection. I'll do this. There we go. All right, so those were his recommendations. Now, it's great to have a strategic vision, but what about the team vision, right? So we're coming in to do the team vision. We're going to try to make sure there's no gap between what upper management think and the teams think. So we started the team assessment, and our team assessment consisted of doing a number of things. I'll have to stand here. Interviewed more than 50 people through one-on-one interviews and through small group interviews, and we interviewed everyone from directors down to team members. From the interviews, we also conducted a survey. We had a 31-question survey based on 6 dimensions, where we were trying to gather information from the people. The 6 dimensions we focused on were Agile basics. How were people with the basics? Did they understand what the basics of Agile were? The second dimension we focused on was product ownership. How clear was the role of the product owner? Did people understand it, since it is such a key role in Agile? The third thing we focused on in the survey was team roles and Agile skills. What about the other roles? And did people have the skills to fulfill the roles in Agile? The fourth dimension was team and processes. Basically, were people understanding the processes? Were they using collaborative planning? Were they using retrospective to do their stuff? Technology and delivery, we focused on release planning. Now, you do have 22 teams. You're trying to run a release train. Are people even talking to one another, right? Are they doing product backlog prioritization so that it overlaps? What about dependencies across the teams, right? Were they doing that? And the last dimension we focused on was quality. So everyone knows that Scrum and Agile is all about improving quality. So we wanted to ask questions, does OpenX have quality goals that are set at the organizational level? Not just that, what about the teams? Are they setting quality goal improvements in every sprint? So those were the 6 dimensions we focused on. The last thing we did in the assessment was we actually attended some team meetings. And the team meetings that we attended the teams that we felt we needed a little bit more insight into their ceremonies and how they worked. So that's everything we did with the team assessment. And we had a number of positive patterns that came out and a number of anti-patterns that came out of the assessment. So the positive patterns, we had a number of them. They're listed there. So some of the key ones they had, teamwork at OpenX was awesome. The teams really felt empowered. They were working together. They seemed to be working very well. The teams also were self-organized. They were really driven and running the teams themselves. They had this 2-week release train going. It was pretty consistent how often they were releasing, and they missed very few trains. And there was a number of other positive things that they were doing. But like any assessment, we found a bunch of opportunities. Now, the opportunities I'm going to show you, I could walk into any organization, I'll probably find the same opportunities for improvement. But there was a big list, many of them. Don't expect you to read all of that. So I'm going to focus on a couple of opportunities, and these are common anti-patterns that I can find probably in most organizations out there. The recommendations that we made are based on 3 pillars, right? The people, the process, and the tools. We always focus on the people first, because that's what Agile is all about. And on the people side, I'm going to focus on a couple of recommendations. So one recommendation was on role clarification and maturing Agile. Now, what do I mean by that? What we found at OpenX was there was confusion with the 3 PMs and the PO. What's the 3 PMs and the PO, you say? So, project manager, program manager, product manager. They all have the same initials. So people were confused, what's the difference in these roles and who's playing what role? And then Agile has added product owner to add to the mix. To make it a little bit more confusing, some people at OpenX, they had Scrum Masters, but they had part-time Scrum Masters. They weren't fulfilling full-time roles, and to make it worse, the line managers were filling some of the Scrum Master roles, plus they were doing some of the technical product owner roles. So there was confusion in what the roles were, and that's where people were saying, I'm not sure, what this means. So out of it, it was clear we needed some role clarification that we had to do. And so the recommendation with the fellow consultant and myself, we actually rolled out a bunch of Agile refresher sessions. We held 5 different sessions. So a half a day for the people that knew Scrum and Kanban, full day for people that needed more, half a day Scrum Master and PO, specific to them. And the 5th one, which I think is one of the most important ones, is being an Agile manager. So in the world of Agile, we've forgotten about the managers because we got to fire them all, right? But there's still managers in your organization. What are you going to do with them? So nobody talks to the managers and what their role is in Agile. That's what that session is about. It's an awesome session you should think about doing in your organization. So our sessions, again, focused about getting back to the basics, fixing those misconceptions of Agile. Even though they had done it 3 times, they weren't using Agile every day, so they were forgetting. And ensuring they all had the same foundation and clarifying those roles that we talked about. So that's what we did on the people side. On the process side, we focused on backlog, one of the most common anti-patterns out there. I walked into any organization and I look at their backlog and I shake my head. Thousands of issues in the backlog, just rolling down, and you scroll down the backlog page and you ask the people, why do you have so many issues in your backlog? Well, because one day I'm going to fix that bug that we opened a year and a half ago. Really? When was the last time you looked at that bug from a year and a half ago? Never, right? So what we recommend is you do what's called a blind close. You draw a line in the sand, you pick a time, and you say anything older than that date, close it. Use that bulk update in Jira, you just close it. So generally, I try to be aggressive, and I say close anything 6 months and older. And then people are a little bit hesitant. I said, okay, go with a year. 2 months, some people are saying 2 months. Wow, that's pretty awesome. So in case of OpenX, we told them a year. Some teams took us to task and went to 6 months, which is pretty awesome. Now that relieves a lot of noise so that the teams can focus on getting work done. That's the goal of that recommendation, right? One of the other anti-patterns out there, and it's going to sound crazy, but what's an epic? There was misunderstandings on what an epic is. Now you say that's pretty basic, right? But scaling Agile has brought in a whole bunch of terms where things are being confused, because now you have an enabler epic and you have other types of epics. So people weren't understanding what an epic is. And in the case of OpenX, they were using epic for 2 things. One, to manage the PMO projects, and another one, the Scrum epic definition. So people were confused what an epic is. So our recommendation was epic goes back to the basics. An epic is a story that's too big to deliver in 1 sprint, period. It's a very basic definition. And what we did was introduce an issue type called PMO project that was used for PMO purposes. So we broke that connection in their minds, okay? Now the confusion with epics led to problems with stories, because the teams had big stories. Stories that just went on from 1 sprint to the next sprint to the next sprint, and you kept shoveling it forward. They were never finishing stories because they were too large. So again, we went back to the basics. Your story's got to be small. You got to finish it, developed and tested in a sprint. It sounds basic, but it's amazing how many basic things people just don't do in Agile. So we were trying to focus the teams and getting them to stop starting stuff and start finishing stuff. That was the goal of this recommendation. We also introduced the process and tools team, small team. It's a team that basically takes requests to make changes in the process or in the tools. And the reason I use this recommendation with customers is it's very revealing when somebody makes a request to change something if a team needs extra coaching. So, you know, people change in teams. I know we want stable teams, but unfortunately people change, you know, change careers, change teams sometimes. They might need some extra coaching. When those requests come into this team, it's your first inkling if a team needs extra coaching. Also, you know, just adding a custom field to Jira, it's simple, but it reveals a lot if they're asking you for a field that talks about the process. So that's why I use a process and tools team, and that's what we did at OpenX as well. Getting to the tools, so this was the landscape for OpenX. They had Jira Software, Confluence, HipChat. They were using AHA for portfolio management, and they had a homegrown service desk. So that was the landscape. Remember the landscape of the teams, right? There's 22 teams, mostly software, some operational, and you have a PMO that's trying to do portfolio management. So that's the OpenX context, right? And whenever we start a tool assessment, especially with Jira, I go right there and I look at that. And it's amazing how many things you can see just by looking at the database statistics for Jira. It's very revealing on anti-patterns for Jira. So I start with that, and I shook my head because there was a lot of anti-patterns. So I'll share 5 of them. And I'm sure that these 5 anti-patterns probably exist in your organization as well. So the 5 anti-patterns I found: custom fields, way too many of them. Remember, I have a little medium-sized organization, right? I'm not running a big bank, but they had 342 custom fields. You really need them. The next anti-pattern, issue types. They had 92 different issue types. And many of them were the same thing. If you're not going to capture different KPIs for issue types, why do you have different issue types? After all, a task is a task is a task, right? You can call it different things, but still someone doing a task on a team. The other anti-pattern is too many statuses. In the case of OpenX, they had 154 statuses. It's like, so you're shaking your head. As a Jira administrator, you're wondering, right? 2 more anti-patterns, resolutions. So everyone knows resolutions for Jira is at a system level. I always tell customers to have a drop-down with not more than 3 to 5. Anybody going on a drop-down, I guarantee it won't look beyond the 5th item on that list and won't be able to distinguish the difference of what's there. So keep your resolutions to a minimum. The last one, workflows, they had 75 different workflows for 135 projects. And again, many of them were doing the same thing, right? So these were the Jira anti-patterns. So what we did from there, we did a Jira optimization. We streamlined all the stuff that we showed. We brought them to shared configurations. We gave them Kanban. We gave them the Scrum team their configuration. From there, we did, for every Jira project, we gave them a Confluence page to do the documentation. We moved them from homegrown to Jira Service Desk. And finally, we got to AHA. We moved them out of AHA and into Portfolio for Jira because we felt that AHA added a layer of complexity that wasn't required for that organization. So that's what we did. And now Paul's going to give you the results from the 9 months.
So what was your favorite resolution there? Cool story, bro, right? That's an indication that something's not really working. So if I had like a Sergio Leone sound, you know, kind of the spaghetti western thing, the good, the bad, and the ugly about what happened. The good stuff, kittens and puppies. Yay, kittens and, come on, everyone asleep? Kittens and puppies! Yay. Yeah, thank you. We kicked this off at the beginning of January. We completed 22 projects, soup to nuts, released, which was more projects than we actually had done in the previous year, okay, which was fantastic. We prioritized them. We used both Scrum and Kanban. The teams had the right skills. We actually had full-time Scrum Masters, albeit some on 3 to 4 projects, okay, or 3, so that's not optimal, but we at least had them well-defined, and it wasn't a part-time job. So the bad, the project portfolio just kept growing, okay? So we kicked off all these projects. We fully allocated the team. We were dealing with IRs and what have you, and we set up this ARB product council process that just started, creating this backlog. And the backlog had 40 things in it, by the time we got to around halfway through the year. So I can't do much arithmetic, but we did 22 in the first half. How many think we're going to get done in the second half? I don't know, 20 some odd? So our backlog was already 2x our capability, right? So that's kind of part of something that we had to work on. The value attainment in each project wasn't well defined. Now look, I know it's really hard to project out in the future when you launch a product or feature into the marketplace, but you got to give it a shot, right? You got to prioritize this stuff somehow. So that was kind of one of the gaps that we saw, and no value accountability was kind of a problem as well. On the staffing side, we had too many multiply staffed people, a lot of single points of failure. And so when somebody's on 3 different projects, you know the curve in terms of productivity. 3 projects, you're at less than half of your productivity because of context switching. So that's not optimal either. And then I guess the ugly stuff, we finished a whole bunch of stuff before anyone was ready to launch it in the market, which kind of indicates that people weren't expecting stuff to be done in the first half of the year, which I think is great. But when you finish something in April and you launch it in August, it's kind of is it still applicable sort of thing, right? So it was a little bit bad. Prioritization, we started off with objectives and very high-level initiatives and project prioritization, but when the engine started turning, that went out the window, and it was all about who wanted to do what sooner. And then without a lot of value attainment in it, it became really hard to prioritize stuff. And then staffing was, we had these line managers, they're still there. They're like, oh crap, I got an IR to work on. Let's move Joe or Sally over here. And then all of a sudden you miss a release. And it's like, well, what happened? Well, we have to go fix this. So a little bit of stuff there. We cleaned up, as Mauricio indicated, we cleaned up pretty much all the Jira configs, standardized the workflows, moved a portfolio, and launched Jira Service Desk. So what are the key takeaways? I think transformation is hard, okay? And one of the things I've been doing this for 35 some odd years. I'm really old. Even if you're in a broken process, people cling to it. It's like, go read Who Moved My Cheese, right? Even though you're running the maze the same stupid way that used to work, and there's no cheese there, people still want to fucking do it. And it's crazy to me. It's like everyone will say, hey, we got to get better at this stuff. All right, so here's 5 or 6 things we're going to change. Oh, change. I'm used to my broken ways. I'm busy, right? And so you never underestimate how hard it is to change. It has to be constant. You got to get up there and just keep talking about it every time you talk to the team. You're not going to please everybody. It's like, why do I have to do X, Y, Z? Well, because, gosh, I got to know what the hell you're working on. Sorry. It's very lightweight stuff, but one of the big misconceptions of Agile is, of course, oh, there's no planning, there's no documentation, there's no it's just do whatever the heck you want. It's a little more rigorous than that, as we all know. So getting people in that mindset is incredibly important. So transformation is hard. Never underestimate how hard. Starts from the top. Wow, you can really not see that, can you? Because we took a screenshot of our executive Kanban board, and I kind of blurred it out so you couldn't see it, but now you can't see anything. Because it was real projects and competitive stuff and what have you. So just imagine there's a board behind there. You can see the lines kind of, right? Yeah,
it's
okay.
kind of there.
So this was the single best tool, because I'd sit in weekly meetings, executive meetings, and they'd go like, well, we want to do this. Like, what do we do? I'm like, can you pull up, what is it again? Oh, the Kanban board. All right, here we go. We're all, this is on the backlog. What's its priority? Move it up in priority. You want to stop something? Here's everything that's in flight. Okay, because before it would just be added on top. And then everyone's like on 4 projects and nothing gets out the door. So the actual board gives you the trade-offs at a very high level, of course, but not exactly. Start with the basics. Now, we've talked a lot about process and like making teams adhere to a basic process, which is kind of not agile, right? I'm a big proponent of shuhari, okay, which is if you don't understand Agile, I'm not going to let you sit down and create 500 statuses, right? Learn the basics. Learn the basics. Go through the basics a whole series of times, and then you can actually start modifying it and tuning it. But if you don't have the basics, it's like it's going to turn into chaos. So did anyone listen to the Norwegian government people this morning about... Yeah, it was fascinating because they launched Jira in 2006, and 6 years later, they let all the teams do whatever the heck they want. 6 years later, well, actually, they did the opposite. They really prescripted stuff, so there was like one project, and everyone worked under that one project. Then they hit the other guardrail, which is like every team can do whatever they want, and they couldn't do any form of reporting for the government on what they're working on, right? So there's a happy medium here. I'm not quite as Martin Fowler absolutist on this, but you got to be able to like report on the stuff you need to report on. Okay? So start with the basics. Anyway, that's it. Actually, what do we do differently? Ooh, I forgot the last slide. This is the most important slide. Metrics first. Velocity for a team. Does it improve? Does it not improve? Can it be explained by people that are shifted around? Monitor it like a hawk. Okay, and everyone's like, well, story points can be completely different, right? By team, but monitor it by team. Understand if people are getting better or worse. Staffing. If people start moving around and your velocity's all over the place, that means people are being pulled in and out of an organization or project. So understand who's staffed on what. When you're going to kick off something, treat it as you're spending money. Okay, so you have to have some real value estimation. If I'm going to take 10 people, let's say, for half the year, that's, $1 million plus investment. What are we going to get from it? And so what's hilarious is, why, thank you, is it time's up. So I've done a lot of startups, and I've done a lot of large corporation, large company turnarounds. And in fact, I worked with Mauricio at the Yellow Pages of Canada doing something very similar to this. And so the hardest thing in the world is to get people to commit to real value estimation, but then people will say, well, man, why can't it be like a startup, And I'm like, all right, we'll be like a startup. So I'm the VC. Why am I giving you $1 million? You don't know. You don't get the money. Because people look for, you want to be a startup. Startups are hard, man. You got to raise money. You got to have a plan. You got to have milestones and all that stuff. So that's another interesting misconception. Limit and groom the backlog, we talked about it, and make sure there's people, when they look at the release plan, they know they have to go to market when you're done. Okay? So those are the big things we would do differently today. Thank you very much. No, stop. Continue. Yeah, no, that's too much. All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. That was wonderful. We have about a little over 2 minutes for questions.
Wow.
Let me run this out to you.
Hi, thank you for this very cool presentation. I can find our company pretty much at every spot that you mentioned. I'm especially curious about one thing that you introduced, which is the portfolio Kanban that nobody could see. Could you explain the different statuses a little bit better? Because we're looking into all kinds of solutions to manage that across the board for us.
Yeah. So we created, this is a 15 million lines of code platform with lots of major services. Not a single architect knows the whole platform. So we created an architecture team and an ARB. So when a project comes in, we actually understand what we got to do. Because before we didn't, okay? So there's this status called hey, it's pre-ARB. It's an idea that somebody wants to take to the ARB. And then the ARB approves it because they put an LOE and whatever on it, very high level t-shirt size stuff. And then it goes into the backlog for prioritization. That backlog for prioritization then goes to what's called the product council, okay, which meets monthly. And then they decide, okay, we got some capacity coming up. Which ones do we want to kick off next? Okay, and then out of that, it actually gets approved by that, and there's a step, we have to staff it, Because one thing we learned that I didn't put up there is don't start the project unless you got everyone ready to go, right? Because then you're going to have a lot of half-complete projects. And so that's kind of a given, right? And so when it's staffed, then we track it through release and GA.
Hi, I think my question's for Mauricio.
Sure.
It's about Jira. You talked about standardizing workflows for Kanban and Scrum teams.
Yeah.
How do you balance that with teams who are self-determining or self-organized and have demands on statuses that other teams don't have? Is it a case of ask for forgiveness rather than permission?
Yeah, no, I get that. So again, I don't want to take away creativity from teams, right? But when the teams are mature enough and they know they're running Agile well, I'm all about giving them the room to go. But we actually brought it back to 4 statuses. To do, in progress, blocked, done. That's it. And we actually had the same 4 statuses on Kanban and Scrum. So it was very basic. We made it very simple. And so most people liked it. And then as they're going to mature, they want to go in and add a code review column. Sure, add it in. We'll give them flexibility then. But we want them to learn the basics. We want them to do their shoe before they go up, right?
Awesome. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'm sure you can find them after.
We'll be around.
Another big round of applause.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.